Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So before we start, just raise of hand, who among us is an artist from the Levant or the region or works in the region? Okay, welcome, and welcome to the curious ones about the region. So our panel today is developing the market and building opportunities for artists in the Levant region. Where is the Levant? The Levant sits at the heart of a much wider MENA or SWANA region that we know. It is growing towards the Gulf, where the investments and industry models are currently transforming the landscape, and towards west, towards the Maghreb, where independent scenes are thriving. The Levant, specifically Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Syria, has long been one of the Arab world's richest cultural crossroads. It's a region where music is part of everyday life, where heritage meets experimentation, and where generations of artists continue to shape the sound of the Arab world. Yet, while creativity flourishes, access to opportunity varies widely. Infrastructure, funding, and professional networks can look very different from Beirut to Amman to Damascus and Ramallah. Understanding how these ecosystems connect is key to building a strong, more sustainable future for the music in the region. We have a fantastic panel with us, representing a range of perspectives, from music policy to cultural ecosystems to publishing, artist development, and regional entrepreneurship. I'm very happy that you are here for this conversation, and I will let everyone introduce themselves as you see convenient, starting with Spek.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Spek. I'm the founder and CEO of Pop Arabia and ESMA. Pop Arabia is a music publisher and independent label based out of Abu Dhabi. ESMA is the first rights organization in the Gulf that looks after the management of all music rights with a Gulf footprint. I also have a third role where I'm the Executive Vice President of International and Emerging Markets at Reservoir, which is a US headquartered music company with interests in publishing, label, and management, and is publicly traded on the NASDAQ.
Angharad.
Hello, my name's Angharad Cooper. I'm an independent consultant based here in Paris. Working mostly across music policy, as well as a producer on various projects and as a coach with artists directly. I'm here really in my role as Director of Operations at the Centre for Music Ecosystems. We are a small global NGO where we specialize in research around music policy, thinking about the study of music ecosystems and advancing that around the world. And I'm also the Vice Chair of the European Music Council, which again works to advocate for better music policy at EU level.
Samir.
Thank you so much. My name is Samir Jaradat. I'm the founder and CEO of Jafra Productions. It's a music hub based in Palestine. Our programs designed toward the ecosystem. Also, I'm the founder and director of Nest Music Incubator. It's an incubator supporting the career of music creators and professionals from the SWANA region. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, all three of you. Let's start with an overview of the current state in the Levant region. What would you say are the biggest strengths and the biggest challenges that we are currently facing in this region?
Me? Okay. I think that the opportunities are true of the region, which is inclusive of Levant, but what I think is most interesting and exciting is just the independent scene that's developing over the past few years. We've seen it, if you look at the way independent scenes have developed around the world, there is a pattern that we start to see in different markets. And so, the entry of, say, Spotify in 2019 I think was an adrenaline shot to the independent scene. It provided for a way that artists could start to see some revenue and really capture monetization in a way that that matched the way it was happening in other markets. And so what we've seen in other markets, which I think we're seeing in Levant, is that in Levant there's always been quite a heavy, strong cultural anchor musically, and what happens when the big global players come in and they establish a way to monetize rights, is that first starts to happen, and the sort of second wave of that is an adrenaline shot of independent music, and you end up sometimes going into a third phase, which is the third phase of that becomes, it's not just the independent music that's being produced, but there starts to become a musical language that starts to develop as the third phase of that, where you start to really create a unique, identifiable sound that is specific to your region. And we've seen this in places like South America, and we've seen this in places like Egypt with Maraganat. We've seen these new genres essentially starting to emerge from the older genres that is a mix of youth culture and modernity. So that, I think, I think we're in that sort of phase between the second phase and the third phase right now, where there has absolutely been a massive output of independent music, but the first phase of that is them trying to find their own voice. And we're sort of now just in that phase where a number of them are creating quite, you could sort of argue that they're creating their own absolutely unique sound that will start to become the anchor that will lead the future, what I think is going to lead the next 10 years. So from a creative perspective, it's very exciting in that respect, and I can see us going through those phases. From a business perspective, there's still a lot broken about the industry. As a publisher who has been in the region for a long time and advocating for publishing rights, there's still a long way that we need to go in terms of the administration of pub rights in the Levant.
You mentioned the independent scene activity. I think, Samer, you could tell us a bit more about the challenges that you are facing in this region from an independent scene perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to repeat what Spek already mentioned. There is, in my opinion, a big difference between the creative side and the business side, as he mentioned. I mean, the creative side is really very strong. We have a lot of strong scene when it comes to the creativity, and the artists are like playing a major role internationally now. And I think the content that is coming from our region is not consumed on a global scale yet. It has a lot of opportunities, so that's why we see it in a positive way. From a business perspective, as also Spek mentioned, it's, we can say, in progress, under development. The term ecosystem itself, I mean, it's a bit tricky when it comes to our region. I think it has to be a goal that we need to reach. Simply, we have no publishing structure, we have no recorded sector, we have no live industry. Most importantly, we don't have a legal environment that supports, this is very basic. A lot of countries in our region has no IP system, has no IP law, which is, for example, in Palestine, we have the IP law since the Ottoman, and it's not active anymore. So yeah, I mean, but I'm very optimistic because there is an awareness toward building an established ecosystem. There is awareness on a governmental level, private sector, even the creators and professionals in the industry. They really now have a level of awareness toward this. I mean, Céline, talking about the challenges is a bit, first of all, I can see that, it's an unstable situation there politically. So that's the major thing I can say, but in general, there is a lot of restrictions when it comes to the mobility, visa restrictions. In my opinion, most importantly, we have different countries separated. So when it comes to the music industry, we don't have resources in common. So for example, we can't talk about Palestine and Lebanon and Syria and they're separated. And when we talk business language, it does not work. I mean, you're going to build an industry for Palestinian creators who can all of them go to a dinner together. It does not work, it's not feasible. So we need to have this kind of mapping.
Indeed. It's not working anymore. Thanks. Indeed, Samer, actually, resilience is a word that can really describe this region, the specific region. Talking about resilience and how challenging it is for individuals and community work, if I may say. I come to you, Angharad. What do you think is the role of creating cultural policies and government in this region to accelerate the growth of the music ecosystem in this region?
Thanks. I mean, there's just so much that can be done at government level, really. I mean, it's completely transformative, so I suppose that's really something to aim for, and it's how you get there. But as Samir was saying, thinking about the music ecosystem concept is just so helpful. It's a very visual concept, and it's really all about collaboration, identifying what exists, what doesn't exist, gaps in the market, and as you mentioned as well, in fact, simply the act of mapping as a first step. Mapping can be quite a large undertaking as well, but it can just, a simple activity like that is so very helpful in terms of everybody not just knowing who else is there, but the role of everybody and then their role as well. In fact, it's really interesting that the word resilience has come up already because in some recent work that we've done over the last few years at the Centre for Music Ecosystems, we've done quite a lot of work thinking about music ecosystems and the concept of resilience. And there's something called the Stockholm's Resilience Centre, I think, and it's very interesting with 7 principles, which we increased to being 9. And they include things like visibility, quite simply knowing who else is there on the playing field. Also, for example, trying to generate positive feedback loops. So if something is working, then talking about it and doing more of it. Building in redundancy, for example, then if one recording studio disappears, then there is still others. So I think there are so many ways of thinking about resilience and so much that governments can do. But the question is really how to get that message sent upwards in the language that policymakers and governments need to hear so that they understand the immense, life-changing and transformative importance, to be honest, of investing in music ecosystems.
Thank you, Angharad. I come back to you, Spek. You mentioned your work about publishing. And I would like, and you also mentioned the DSP's work. I would like to see how would you say it would be a good part of creating this ecosystem from an international perspective, like DSPs that are internationally accessing this market, and for the publishing work that is connecting between international artists and local artists. How would you see the role of these actors, international actors, is affecting the region?
Okay. This can be deep water that you're asking me to get into. So I'll give an example, right? The reality is, and this is when you get into the weeds of the way licensing works globally, right? Historically, and this is true of the Middle East, but it's true of anywhere outside of the West, they have, the industry at large has historically treated the Middle East as an extension of Europe. That is to say, when you're putting licensing deals in place for DSPs that are operating and monetizing in the Middle East, what they've historically done is rather than figure out because, I mean, and to be fair to the DSPs, there was never any infrastructure locally on the ground. And so there weren't entities that were solving for these fairly complicated problems. And so if you're Spotify or Apple and you're like, okay, how do I get licensed so that all the music that people are consuming in this Middle Eastern market are covered, what the easiest thing to do is, I already did all of this licensing in Europe, so let me just add a bunch of countries onto my European deal and just call it an extension of Europe, right? With different royalty rates. And that is the way India was treated, it's the way the Far East was treated, and it's the way the Middle East is treated. And it continues to be that way. And it will continue to be that way until somebody says stop. And saying stop actually isn't enough. What you need to do is you need to be able to provide a better solution, you know? And so what we've tried to do is when we set up ESMA as a rights organization in 2020, we immediately were representing PRS, the British Rights Society, as well as SOCAN, the Canadian Society, and we've now signed about 40 reciprocal or unilateral agreements with rights organizations around the world. We just signed GEMA, the German Society, a few weeks ago. We represent essentially the world's music through, you know, if you're licensing one of these services, you need a mix of performing rights and mechanical rights and master rights. It's complicated. So there was never anybody in the Middle East that was figuring out how to bring all of the various stakeholders together and create a funnel so that when Spotify comes, I can say to Spotify, you know what, you can license the Middle East through this entity over here, or you can keep treating it as an extension of Europe, and you're still going to have to figure out how to get all the various Arab rights holders and performing rights and so on and so forth. So we've tried to do that by creating an infrastructure in ESMA that, you know, nobody had really done the heavy lifting to pull all the various stakeholders under one roof. Until there is a regional licensing solution whereby those rights are licensed locally and are distributed locally, we will always just be the stepchild of Europe. And so it's incumbent on us to provide those solutions, is the way that I've looked at it. And you might be surprised to hear that when you do take control of that, try to take control of this ecosystem and say, okay, no, we're going to deliver a solution that is by the region, for the region, you're not very popular in Europe when you do that. And so it becomes a very political battle. But ultimately, I believe that the market is going to require a regional solution for the region. And we as stakeholders in the game have no right to complain if we haven't done anything to deliver a solution either. And so my view has been, okay, let's stick our neck out and let people throw their darts at us if they have to. Ultimately, you're never going to build an ecosystem in the market unless you build an ecosystem in the market and stop outsourcing to Europe or North America to solve our problems.
I join you on the point that more education has to be done to understand the complexity of this region. We tend to look at the MENA as if it was one block, one country, while it's a whole diversity. Even in the Levant, from a city to another, we have more complexity on this front. And I think that, yes, it's our role for Middle Eastern and people from this region to educate ourselves first and then the market, and to be able to have this voice. And I think that with Nest, you are doing a great job locally on this front as an incubator that is from local people who are taking in hands the work itself, and they are working locally and internationally. What can you tell us about your experience, Samer, in this situation where you were able to develop this Nest incubator from Palestine, now expanding to the rest of the region? What is the importance of taking these initiatives as local to be able to grow in this context?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when we started NIST, we were thinking how to export our music and content globally and how we can make a reach for these creators. Also, we see the importance of supporting the career of our creators. It's missing, and there are a lot of skills, and in this part missing. Simply, I think is our creators understand creativity, as we mentioned. But when it comes to the business and to the entrepreneurial mindset, it's really a lot of mess there, and this will make our industry not sustainable, even their career. So the idea was to establish an incubator that bring all these things together. The first cycle was just to pilot and to understand the structure and methodology, and we were succeed to build the structure in a way that fits the creators and professionals in the region. The first phase was focusing on the creative knowledge. We did a lot of sessions, workshops, and master classes, and the idea here is to also curate these sessions into themes that is more needed. So, for example, in the last cycle, we built it in 4 themes: the artistic identity, the digital marketing, the live industry, and copyrights. And then the second phase, focusing more on the practical side, where we do a production camp, songwriting camps. The third phase focus on the long-term incubation, where we support the artists and incubate them on a long term, and this is more customized, but this is like more a growth plan with the artists. I think the model works very well in Palestine, in Jordan, and now we're expanding to other countries in the region, because the idea is to build it all over Swana region. And the interesting thing is that, the community is becoming more solid. We have no experience managing communities, etc. It's happening by default, but it's really becoming something interesting to see how also a solid community can play a major role in making these incubators as a success story.
And in your experience, you are getting as well support from European countries and from external players to support these initiatives locally, right?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of partners, including the French Development Agency, AFD, and Expertise France, and we're very connected to the French market, actually. So we're so happy that we established a lot of partnerships. We're happy that we have a long history with Believe and our partnership, and we did with many French partners here, and it's like we're developing it now and trying to build or to open opportunities for businesses from here going to our region and see how this kind of co-model can work. This is super important because we believe in this. We believe that really this kind of relationships should be win-win situation and based on a business language that serve all the communities.
Sorry. I think it's a very interesting indicator of the growth, because we are seeing some kind of resistance from your experience, but some kind of support in this experience. So this is healthy growth. Angharad, I come back to you. From this context, what do you think are the learnings that we as a region in the Levant can learn from other territories or other regions' experience to grow faster?
To grow faster, that's an interesting word, because I think what's probably more important is probably growing sustainably, even though, of course, time is of the essence as well. Thinking of some different parts of the world where I've been able to do some work either as a researcher or a consultant through my work with the Centre for Music Ecosystems. I mean, really, I think it's about advocacy, about government level. So having that organised voice in terms of knowing what you need, knowing what is missing, and also knowing what's going well. We really mustn't forget that as well, celebrating strengths and unique strengths, of which, of course, there are so many. So feeding that up the chain. For example, trying to influence public policy in Greenland, for example, just last year, or even this year, they've developed a new artist tax status. This means that it's a lot easier for anybody to enter the industry as a professional artist, meaning that it's more open to people from different socio-economic backgrounds. That could be something to consider. Ireland, for several years now, has been experimenting with a kind of universal basic income for artists, which I think they've literally just in the news the last few days, they've decided to make a permanent initiative. So basically, there are loads of best practice examples. So to be honest, one thing I would really say is conversations like this, looking around at what already works, because there's a reason it does work, and we can break all of that down and look at it more deeply. But I think really something which is interesting, thinking about the public support side, the public funding, that perhaps is where it's easier to make a space for initiatives or education, experimentation, all of those things which mean that there's a step away from the status quo and there's the ability to really create something new and bold and imaginative.
I'll say one thing just to add to what Angharad said is that there is obviously a lot of opportunity because there's a lot of good examples that we can learn from more developed markets and how they've achieved it. But there's also a huge opportunity in the Middle East because when you're starting with a clean slate, it means you don't have the legacy of 150 years of a particular way of doing things. The only reason we do things in the industry the way that we do is because intellectual property as a concept has slowly evolved over 150 years. It used to be that when you bought music 100 years ago, what that meant was you were buying a book with sheet music in it. That was the only way to buy music before vinyl, And so what do we have? We have what's called a mechanical royalty because you had to mechanically produce this sheet music with a machine, and then once we had speakers and vinyl, then we had performance rights, and it's evolved over the decades because our technology has evolved over the decades. But if you're starting on a clean slate in 2025, there's no reason to repeat the way that we did it 100 years ago. We could actually innovate and be ahead of the West. And in the Middle East right now, with the Gulf countries in particular, they've got the money to be able to make these autonomous decisions and leapfrog ahead. They just need, it just boils down to who's going to have the vision to implement it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, but let's be honest as well, in the Levant countries, sustainability cannot be only local. So there's a big need for artists to develop their audience outside of the Middle East because that's where the money coming from at the moment. What do you think is the role of the festivals, showcases, and the SPs internationally to grow the audience of these artists internationally so that we can have a start of sustainable work? Not one artist in the Middle East can be living out of their music.
I think all of it is important. It's. I mean, we were just talking about this now. When I first moved to the UAE in 2006, there weren't really a lot of opportunities to meet your compatriots in the music industry, and in fact, it was the opposite. You didn't want to meet other people in the music industry because everybody was suspicious of each other, and so now. It's changed, there's a newer generation, there's incubators, there's a younger generation of people that have less baggage than the old school guys did, and so, but we need to meet. We need to sit down, we need to break bread, we need to sort of build a community. And that's festivals and that's all of it. But we need a community, and the community starts with just talking to each other and talking to each other from one country to the next, but even within one country, and so I think things like this, things like MaMA, things like IMS in Dubai, any opportunity for all of us to get together is one step closer to getting us towards the promised land.
What about the artist perspective that you are working with, Samer?
About yeah, I mean, definitely there is a need to export and to reach global market. This is a need because for sure, even with the promising numbers we have in our industry, it's not enough to build a career and to to rely on these opportunities there. We have very, how should I say into English, but very funky, numbers coming. Okay, this is the most growing market.
Fastest growing region.
This is interesting, but the hidden fact that all of these revenues coming from the digital, which is a bit, show how our industry is still weak. That means we don't have other income sources. We don't have collecting royalties. We don't have a lot of things. Live industry is still not structured. So that means the artists, if they want really to do their career, they have to rely on global markets. This is something really important for them. So that's why we're focusing a lot on building a model that, developing the relationship with the international stakeholders, not only in the live industry, but even all the players in the industry.
So this is a question for the three of you. If you had to change just one thing tomorrow to strengthen the music industry in this region, what would it be?
You know it.
Magic wand.
Yeah, I mean, the unstable situation is because the occupation actually, and I mean the mobility and the inability for artists to move is making them to lose a lot of opportunities. I'm very connected to this, and I'm doing a research with a lot of creators from this one region to see the amount of the huge numbers, man. They're losing a lot of concerts, they're losing a lot of opportunities just because they can't travel. So that's one thing, yeah.
Angharad, what would be your answer?
I think specifically, and it's come up a few times today, although I haven't mentioned it, but specifically it's the issue of IP and copyright and having proper infrastructure there. That will make the biggest change, I believe, in, economically, socially, culturally. But really generally thinking about the idea of a music policy. A music policy can be super localized or it could be regional. There are many different ways of going about it. So maybe creating a kind of working group or working towards that in some way, because then everything can really be explored.
I think if you fix the system of collective management of rights, you solve for a lot of the problems in the industry, because it's either a virtuous cycle or an unvirtuous cycle, but the beginning of the cycle starts with a songwriter getting paid. If a songwriter can't get paid from writing a song that is successful, then none of the other parts of the ecosystem work very well. The song is the currency, more than the money or anything else. You can't, even a recording is worthless if there isn't a song in that recording, right? And so if you can't create an ecosystem where songwriters' rights and the rights of music publishers who represent those songwriters is protected, then you're gonna struggle at every juncture of the ecosystem. So that's why we built ESMA, and I'm glad to say that in the UAE that is now being addressed. Maybe I might have different perspectives of how that should be addressed, but I think that it's good that it's being addressed in the UAE, and people are trying to solve for that problem. Saudi is also now looking at this. The problem or the challenge is that historically, the way copyright has been managed as a copyright system is linked to the national policy, because the national policy is linked to the copyright law in each country, which will change from one country to the next. So you can't have a Levant-wide solution or a MENA-wide solution in one fell swoop. It requires localizing in each country. There are ways that you can hopefully think a little bit bigger, and that's why with ESMA we decided that our footprint was going to be the 6 Gulf countries, which were essentially untouched. But if you fix that with expertise, the problem is that right now people are trying to fix it, but they don't necessarily have the expertise. They're kind of trying to wade in, say, let's repeat what's going on in Europe or in America, and that to me is the backwards way of looking at it. I think we have the opportunity to create the very best system in the world out of the Middle East by learning from the mistakes over decades and over 100 years in more developed markets. But it boils back down to that thing. Can the songwriter get paid? You fix that, you fix everything else.
Yes, it's all about customization of the solutions. And this is why this panel was created. Not to discourage the artists who are among us today, and because all of this is at community level, government level. What would be your advice for the emerging artists from this region to help their career grow in this context today?
Yeah, I mean, developing the entrepreneurial mindset, I think it plays a big role because then we understand the mechanism of how the global industry works, and this is key because nowadays is like there is a traffic, there is a millions of things happening every 1 minute, so you need to be really aware about how it works all around the world, not only in Europe, in the States, in Canada, everywhere. That's number one. I think a lot of creators in our region miss that part. Then I think communication and collaboration, I think this is like super important. We have to convince them that this is super important and to have this kind of pitching skills, communication skills, where they can, introduce their projects, introduce themselves in a way that, leave this impact. There are a lot of things, but these are the major 2 things, coming to mind.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that's just been said here, but very much working together is incredibly important. I think, one thing that we see around the world in developing communities in terms of music is that often few people try to do very, very many things, and that's incredible what they achieve. But it does mean this can also lead to burnout. It also means that knowledge can be really held by a particular, people who just naturally rise up as leaders or, real experts. And in fact, it's a way of making sure that knowledge is disseminated so that it's actually shared and owned by everybody. They have a phrase for that, by the way, in the Faroe Islands, which is that these people are fiery souls and they really drive progress and drive everything. But then when these people leave the communities because either they've left to a different country for work opportunities, perhaps they've even passed on, then that knowledge doesn't often go any further. So that's one thing. But really making sure you're working together rather than in competition. So again, it's all about communication, really.
Collaboration, absolutely. Collaboration is key. I found that to be the case in my own career as an artist before I got into the business. But the underlying thing that I would say is it's a new world out there, and this idea that success, commercial success, global commercial success is defined as singing in English or singing in French or some Western language, I think is super played out. What I tell my artists is I actually don't want you to sing in English. I prefer if you sing in Arabic. I'm not interested in signing somebody singing in English. There's plenty of labels that will do that. I think that the future is going to be owned by the Arabic language, by Korean, by Hindi, by, it's a new world out there, and this idea that you need to have a hit in America in order to become a global star, I think is just ultimately yesterday's paradigm.
Indeed, we are starting to see also a labeling of the Arabic music as A-pop, just like we have a K-pop. From this perspective, actually, what can similar audiences, like European audiences, how can they help in this sustainability creation of this market?
I think it's collaboration. You know, I think that the most interesting things, you know, when you see people from two completely different cultures have a baby, it's always the most beautiful looking baby, you know? And it's sort of like that with music, you know? Like if you bring two things from unexpected corners together, it creates the most interesting outcomes. And I think that that's ultimately what people are interested in. People want to hear new. They always want to hear new. It's the search of new is almost the most basic common denominator of the music industry. That is a pattern that you can see from the beginning of it, you know? So even today, people don't want to hear the same shit that they've heard over and over again. They want to hear something new, and it's on us to give them that, you know? And what is that new? Who knows? We're not going to know until you go in and create it. So I'd say venture for the new.
Yeah, also, Céline, I want to remind that there is a huge diaspora also in Europe, in all around the world, and they consume our music in a different way. I mean, for example, Lebanese in Brazil or Palestinians in Chile, they're like, you know, more than what is in Palestine or in Lebanon. So we need to take care of the diaspora and find the right way of how to communicate with them. But also when it comes to the like for example France here, I mean a lot of Palestinians, a lot of Arab artists from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, they started their career from here and grow from here. I manage Trio Gibran, and they started from here since 22 years now. So they got their international career from here. So I mean, there is kind of natural relationship that is, you know, happening already in the consumption of our music, but it's growing actually.
Indeed.
And I would add, I suppose, creating spaces such as this one, you know, for different platforms, for exchange, for being curious, as you mentioned, which is such an important word, I think, for listening, for being creative together. Yeah, it's so enjoyable as well.
Shout out to Emily for programming this panel.
Thank you, Emily.
I'm being mindful of the time because I want to leave some time for the questions from audience. Where do you see the Levantine music in 5 years?
Oh yeah, I mean, in general, to be honest, I see the future of the music industry in our region. From a business perspective as well, but I mean it's really interesting to think about the content from the creative side. It's really unconsumed. It's really has a lot of opportunities all around the world. So it's booming, Céline, and yeah, we're very optimistic.
Well, hopefully growing in visibility, that would be wonderful. Having not been to the Levant region myself, I'm less aware, but a recent example of something I've seen is, for example, the education work that's happening in Armenia, which reminds me a little of some of the conversations we've had, but I've seen a centre in Armenia which is called the Tumo Centre, which educates 10,000 young people a week for free in music technology, for example, and gaming and various other techniques. And I can only imagine where they will be in 5 years' time. So I think if the right choices are made in terms of investments, then you can see change very, very quickly.
I think the industry stuff that we need to see happen in terms of infrastructure is probably more of a 10-year outlook than a 5-year outlook, but I think we're likely to produce a global star in the next 5 years out of the Levant.
Do any of you have any question for the panelists?
Good afternoon, this is Mike Massey. I'm a singer-songwriter and producer. My question is actually not a question, but more of an observation, and I've been really very curious to know how the Arabic language is actually spoken and sang in such multiple countries in this globe, and it's still not considered as international. Whether we consider the Spanish language as international, English as international, Chinese, for instance, because it's a big market, but why not Arabic? We have so many Arab spoken or singing artists in this world, despite the diaspora that is present everywhere, and we still consider it as a small industry. And I think this is absurd, because education starts with acknowledging our own identity as artists, and then throughout these artists, we need to educate also people accompanying these artists and artists themselves who's gonna become maybe managers or curators or whatever, promoting the business side of the music industry. So I think that listening skills are very important, but also pride with the culture is very important, because it actually brands really the music industry on the business side as well. Which means if we sell our music as really branded, not world music, with this absurdity around the identity of the music, or consider it just as a minor art or just a side dish, will never work. So what do you think about that? My question is for you, Spek. Thank you.
There's a saying, ghettos of the mind, We're all in a ghetto of our own mind, those prison bars are just in our own heads as to why we are not, but it's a combination of thinking big enough, right? But also a quantum of the output that we've had, right? So if you look at the world, about 7% of the world speaks Arabic, right? But less than 1% of the content available online is in Arabic. So that differential is why we still think of Arabic as a small thing, right? But we're now producing tens of thousands of tracks a day that are going onto those streaming platforms. And so I think what we're seeing with these funky numbers, the growth in the Middle East is actually a reflection of the output catching up to the rest of the world, And what we haven't seen yet is the volume of output matching up with the quality of output of Adele or Radiohead or whoever it might be, name your contemporary artist, right? But we think, given the creative, just pulling aside all the business stuff, right? If you're a creative person, you are sensitive. I don't care whether you're a creative person in Palestine or Japan. If you're a great creative person, you're sensitive. And if you're a great creative person and you're also sensitive, then you have an ability to sort of, put your antenna in the air and pull out all of the crap that you're surrounded by and articulate that into a song that moves somebody, right? If you're really, really good at it, right? And we have a fertile environment for people who have something to say in the Middle East. There's arguably maybe not a better region in the world where people have a reason to be outspoken, to talk about what's going on in their backyard. So I believe that it's just literally just a matter of time, before the opportunity catches up to the environment that's already there with creative people, From repression comes expression. So, and we have a lot of repression in the region, so we have a lot of people that want to express themselves, and it's only a matter of time before our Adele moment where this one song just kind of captures the hearts of millions of people. I believe that that's just like, it's going to be an accident. It's going to feel like an accident when it happens, but it's not. It's been building up for years.
Right.
I just wanted to add just one sentence. The language part is totally political, so it's just to make it very clear.
On the positive outcome, because you've mentioned Spanish and Korean, this has been really with the shift of the whole global industry in terms of production, because it was a global industry dominated by the majors who would select the artists. So it was, in a kind of way, it was gatekeeping. Right now, with the rise of the independent music, the only way is up, and the potential is huge, especially for our region that has around 80% of independent artists producing for themselves. So I think it's more of a positive outlook for the Arabic language to come next, because that was the rise that we've seen with Spanish, with Indian, amazing Indian consumption globally, with Korean as well. So these are like the construction of a new era and how the production is being done and put out there. So yeah. Let us take another and then we come back to you.
Hi, so my question is about the artists going on the global stage as a marker of success. And I'm noticing a shift in that, because when artists go on the global stage and go internationally, that creates a sort of economic dependence, for one, and for two, a different kind of success, and so a change in the artist's creative processes and in the artist's crowds and publics, and how the artist is received. So what I'm noticing now is that some artists, for instance from Egypt, either go abroad and then come back home and keep creating more success. So for instance, Wiggs, a rapper who featured with Tyke, for instance, and went back home and kept on breaking records, right? And then, for instance, I don't know, an artist like Zayd Khaled from Jordan went to Egypt to be more successful, never went on the global stage. And so there's, I think, a need and a desire for artists now to either, when they go globally, they go to countries like Saudi or the UAE or Lebanon, or keep actually creating at home. And so the value of their art is more valued when it's home. So how do we shift that? You know, how do we start as music professionals say artists don't need to go global to be successful? And so how do we also change it internally first before we decide that artists need to go abroad? Because I don't think people want that anymore. Or at least I'm noticing in my community a lot of artists that don't want that anymore. So is there a new dynamic to be put in progress? Or is there a shift in dynamic that needs to happen? What do you think about that? Thank you.
I think it's a global marketplace, and I think that you know, in Egypt, you could be the biggest thing in Egypt, right? But Egypt also has a ceiling, right? If you're Wegs, right, who it's hard to get bigger than he is in Egypt, right? And so you hit a ceiling at some point, right? And you know, it's almost like an old adage that we would talk about in the music industry back in the day. It was like, it was a running joke. It was like, I'm huge in Japan. You know, there were certain artists that did super well in Japan years after they were not. You know, I'm thinking about in Canada, Snow was with Informer. You know, he was a huge global hit, right? Canadian kid. And for years afterwards, he would keep putting out albums that were massive in Japan, but nobody in Canada would arrest him, you know? And so it's almost like it's a philosophical question, you know? It's like, would you rather be massive for the rest of your career in Japan or have one global hit? You know, if that was a binary choice, you know? It's a hard one to sort of tackle, right? Back in the day, it was possible to be huge just in Canada or just in Japan. Today, because of streaming and the way it's gone, I don't think so. I think every artist wants to sort of build some sort of foundation outside of their home territory, especially like Egypt has the benefit of it's a tastemaker country. Whatever pops in Egypt sort of travels pretty well around the region, but it's also, you probably got the lowest rates of royalty, you know, or amongst the lowest, you know, so 1 million streams means less in Egypt than it does in Saudi, you know, and so if you're trying to build a career, you want to build it everywhere. And it might not be that you need to be huge in the States. It might be that you're, you know, when we work with Mohammed Ramadan, and whenever I talk to him about this, he's huge in Egypt, and he said, I'll say to him, oh, you know, what about this, or what about this collab? He'd be like, nah, man, I want to crack Africa, you know? And I'm like, that's the smart way to be thinking about it, you know? And that's why I think that's why I believe Ramadan is always going to win, because he's not drunk on the Kool-Aid of, you know, I need to be big in France or I need to sell out in London. He doesn't care about that. He's like, make me huge in Africa. Everybody else will follow. And he's right. He's 100% right, you know? And that, I think, is the way. So I don't think it's about, I don't think it's about either I'm local in my country or I'm not. I think it's a big world out there. What are the markets that you think are the ones that you really want to mess with, you know, and focus your efforts on? And if you choose a couple of these countries that you've got already a foot in the door, you could actually build an entire career for the rest of your career without ever having a hit in Canada or America.
But I think also if your question is about the identity, I mean, it's really good to define the identity where we can understand it like it can move, you know, it can be something different in the future. So we can see it from a very, very close-minded. This is my opinion, but I definitely understand and respect if there is an artist wants to be like limited to a niche market or to a niche audience. This is his or her choice. But at the end, we're not advising artists to start their career from here. We're advising them to take their minds and travel wherever they want and be in communication with all audience around the world. Because simply, maybe I like a Korean artist, I like an Egyptian artist, and I think the examples you mentioned, Wigs, and I think they have very solid identity. They're very well educated, and they know what they're doing. So I mean, it can be from Cairo, from Saudi Arabia, from United Arab Emirates, from any part of the world.
We're running short on time. I'd like just to leave food for thoughts here, but please reassure that all the panelists will be here. If you have any more questions, we can take it out there. Just one artist from the Levant to present to this audience to listen to.
I would advise you to listen to Trio Gibran.
I'm very biased, but Bedouin Burger is a band signed to us. Oh, yeah. The lead singer is Syrian, the producer is Lebanese, and they're both based out of Paris and have played, I think they played MaMA last year.
I love them.
But they're incredible. Yeah.
My recommendation would be Zayn. She just dropped her album today.
I was going to say that one as well.
Thank you everyone for attending.